What if the person you crave most is the one who terrifies you? What if their silence isn't rejection, but a battle within their soul? Marcus Kane stood at the edge of his empire, a man who conquered markets but feared his own heart. When he met Lena, everything changed. This is the story of a man's silence, a woman's strength, and a truth that will shake you to your core. The conference hall was a cathedral of ambition, its glass walls reflecting the city's restless pulse. Marcus Kane, 40, stood at its center, his tailored suit a shield, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator assessing prey. He was the founder of Nexus, a tech firm that turned data into dominance and dominance into wealth. His life was a machine, precise, efficient, controlled. Emotions were noise, variables to be filtered out. But tonight the machine was about to falter. Lena Voss stood across the room, a writer whose words carried the weight of truth. Her black blazer was sharp yet unassuming, her dark hair pulled back to reveal eyes that saw through facades. She was the keynote speaker, her topic the human cost of progress. Marcus had come to network, to close deals, but her voice stopped him cold. Technology connects us, she said, her tone clear and unyielding, but it cannot replace the courage to be seen. Marcus felt a jolt, raw and primal. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was striking. Her features a blend of defiance and grace, like a statue carved from resolve. It was her certainty, her refusal to bend to the room's self-important hum. She was chaos to his order, and he wanted her. The thought was a crack in his armor, a threat to the empire he'd built. He approached her after the talk, his steps measured, his pulse racing. "Your speech," he said, his voice low. It was provocative. Lena's eyes met his, a spark of curiosity in their depths. "Provocative's good," she replied, a half-smile playing on her lips. "It means you're listening." They talked, the conversation a dance of intellect and restraint. She spoke of her novels, stories that peeled back the human soul. He spoke of Nexus, systems that shape the world. Beneath the words, a current flowed, desire, unspoken but electric. When she handed him her card, her fingers brushing his, Marcus felt the ground shift. "Call me," she said, her tone light, but her gaze steady. "If you're brave enough." He nodded, pocketing the card. But as he left the hall, the night, air cold against his skin, her challenge echoed. Brave enough? He'd faced boardrooms, lawsuits, market crashes. But this was different. This was a dragon he didn't know how to face. Marcus drove home, the city's lights blurring past. His, penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, a reflection of his soul. He placed Lena's card on his desk, its edges sharp against his fingers. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to know her. But something stopped him. A fear, deep and unnameable. He'd built his life on control, on suppressing the chaos of emotion. Lena was chaos incarnate, and wanting her meant risking everything. He thought of his father, a man of iron and grit. "Men don't feel, Marcus," he'd said, his voice rough from years in the factory. "They do." Marcus had taken that lesson to heart, forging a life where emotions were locked away like secrets in a vault. Success demanded sacrifice, and love was a luxury he couldn't afford. But Lena's words, the courage to be seen, haunted him. What did it mean to be seen? And why did the thought terrify him? The next day, Marcus threw himself into work. A new product launch was imminent, a platform that would redefine data analytics. He met with engineers, investors, marketers, his mind a steel trap. But Lena lingered, a ghost in his thoughts. He saw her in the curve of a graph, the rhythm of code, the quiet moments before sleep. He wanted to call her, but his hand froze, each time he reached for the phone. The silence grew, a weight pressing against his chest. Weeks passed, and Marcus's empire thrived. Nexus's stock soared, and the media hailed him as a visionary. But the silence gnawed at him. He imagined Lena writing, her pen moving with purpose, her eyes alight with stories. He wondered what it would be like to stand beside her, to share in her fire. But fear held him back. Fear of losing control, of being exposed, of failing. One evening, restless and unable to focus, Marcus found himself at a bookstore event. Lena was reading from her latest novel, her voice a melody of conviction and vulnerability. The room was packed, but Marcus stood at the back, unseen. Her words cut through him, tales of love and loss, of hearts that dared to break. When she finished, the crowd applauded, but Marcus felt only the weight of his silence. She saw him as she stepped off the stage, her eyes locking onto his. "Marcus," she said, approaching, her tone warm but guarded. "I didn't expect you here." "I didn't expect to be here," he admitted, his throat tight. "Your work, it's powerful." They talked, the conversation effortless yet charged. Lena spoke of her process, the way stories emerged from pain and truth. Marcus spoke of his vision, the drive to build something lasting. But when the moment came to ask her out, to bridge the gap, he hesitated. Lena didn't push. She smiled, wished him well, and walked away. And in that moment, Marcus felt the silence like a stone around his neck. He left the bookstore, the city's hum a distant roar. Why couldn't he act? He was a man of action, a builder of worlds. But Lena wasn't a problem to solve. She was a mystery, a force that demanded he confront the parts of himself he'd buried. And that terrified him. What if he let her in? What if he lost himself? What if he wasn't enough? Marcus's office was a fortress, its windows framing the city like a trophy. He sat at his desk, Lena's card staring back at him. He'd meant to call her, had rehearsed the words in his mind. But each attempt ended in silence, his thumb hovering over her number. The void grew, swallowing his resolve. His father's voice echoed, a command from childhood. "Emotions are a luxury, Marcus. They cloud the mind." His father, a factory foreman, had been a man of action, not feeling. Marcus had internalized that lesson, building a life where control was king. Emotions were chaos, and chaos was the enemy. But Lena was chaos incarnate, not reckless, but alive, her honesty a flame that threatened to burn through his defenses. Flashbacks haunted him. At 10, he'd cried when his dog died, only to see his father's disapproval. "Toughen up," he'd said. At 20, he'd lost his first love, Sarah, because he couldn't open up. "You're a wall, Marcus," she'd said, tears in her eyes. He'd vowed never to let emotions rule him again. Success became his shield, Nexus his sword. But Lena was different. She wasn't a fleeting attraction. She was a force, a presence that demanded he confront his buried heart. Marcus threw himself into work, launching Nexus's new platform. Meetings consumed his days, numbers his nights. But Lena lingered, her words, the courage to be seen, a thorn in his mind. He imagined her writing, her studio filled with books and light. He wanted to be part of that world, but fear stopped him. What if he failed her? What if he wasn't enough? One night, he drove to the waterfront, the city's lights glittering across the water. He pulled Lena's card from his wallet, its edges worn from his touch. He wanted to call her, to tell her everything, his fears, his longing, his struggle. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he sat in silence, the weight of his choice a chain around his heart. Weeks later, Marcus attended another event, a literary panel where Lena was a speaker. She was radiant, her words sharp and true. He watched from the crowd, unseen, his heart a battlefield. When their eyes met afterward, she approached. "You're making a habit of this," she said, her tone playful but her eyes searching. "I guess I am," he replied, forcing a smile. They talked, but the distance between them grew. Marcus wanted to ask her out, to close the gap, but fear held him back. Lena didn't chase. She nodded, her smile soft, and walked away. The silence followed him home, louder than ever. Marcus's life began to fray. A rival, Ethan Cole, challenged Nexus's dominance, spreading rumors that shook Investor. Confidence? Marcus fought back, his focus razor-sharp, but the strain showed. At night, he dreamed of Lena, her voice calling him to something greater. But each morning, he woke to silence, his fear a wall he couldn't climb. Peterson's words came to him from a lecture he'd watched late at night. The dragon of chaos is always there. You don't slay it. You learn to live with it. Lena was his dragon, not because she was dangerous, but because she forced him to face the chaos within. His desire for her was a call to adventure, but every instinct screamed retreat. He thought of his past, the lessons that shaped him, his father's stoicism, Sarah's departure, the years of building Nexus, all had taught him that vulnerability was weakness. But Lena challenged that. Her strength, her refusal to bend, made him question everything. Was control truly strength, or was it a cage? Marcus stood at a crossroads. He could stay silent, safe in his fortress of order, or he could risk everything, his identity, his autonomy, his heart, for a chance at something real. The choice was his, but the silence was deafening. Marcus's life was a monument to order, each achievement a brick in the wall that kept chaos at bay. But Lena was a crack in that wall, a force that threatened to bring it all down. He couldn't stop thinking about her, yet he couldn't act. The silence grew louder, a cacophony of doubt and longing. He saw himself as the wounded king, an archetype Peterson described, a ruler who'd conquered external foes but carried an unhealed wound within. Marcus's wound was his heart, scarred by years of suppressing emotion. His father's lessons, Sarah's rejection, the relentless drive for success, they'd left him strong but broken, a king without a kingdom of the soul. Work became a refuge, but even that began to crumble. Ethan Cole's attacks intensified, leaking false reports about Nexus's finances. Marcus fought back, his mind a steel trap, but the pressure mounted. At night, sleep eluded him, his dreams filled with Lena's face, her words a challenge he couldn't answer. He saw her in the city's lights, the curve of a bridge, the rhythm of rain. She was everywhere and nowhere. Marcus's fear wasn't just about Lena. It was about what she represented. The unknown, the uncontrollable, the possibility of pain. He'd built his identity on competence, on being the man who could handle anything. But love wasn't a market to conquer. It was a leap into the abyss, and Marcus wasn't sure he could survive the fall. Peterson's words haunted him. You don't get what you want by avoiding pain. You get it by facing it. Lena was his pain, not because she hurt him, but because she forced him to feel. His desire for her was a call to confront his shadow, the parts of himself he'd buried. But every instinct screamed retreat. Flashbacks deepened his turmoil. At 15, he'd watched his mother leave, her suitcases a silent accusation. His father had said nothing, his face a mask of stone. Marcus had learned then that love was a risk, a wound waiting to happen. At 30, Sarah had echoed that lesson, walking away because he couldn't let her in. Now at 40, Lena stood before him, a chance to rewrite the story. But the fear was stronger than ever. One night, Marcus drove to the city's edge where the lights gave way to darkness. He stood by the water, Lena's card in his hand. He wanted to call her, to confess his fear, his longing, his struggle, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he tore the card in half, the pieces falling like ash. The act was a surrender, a retreat into silence. But it didn't bring peace. It brought despair. The next day, Marcus saw Lena's name in the news, a new novel, critically acclaimed. He bought the book, reading it in one sitting. Her words were a mirror, reflecting his own pain, his own longing. He saw himself in her characters, men who loved but feared, who chose silence over risk. The realization was a knife to the heart. He wasn't just failing Lena, he was failing himself. Marcus began to unravel. Meetings went poorly, his temper flaring. Ethan's attacks grew bolder, and Nexus's stock dipped. Marcus fought to regain control, but the chaos was winning. He thought of Peterson's archetype of the hero, the man who faces the dragon and emerges transformed. But Marcus wasn't a hero. He was a king, wounded and afraid, hiding behind a throne of silence. Lena's absence was a wound of its own. He imagined her moving on, her life full of light and purpose. She didn't need him, and that truth was both painful and liberating. She was whole without him, a woman who chose her path with courage. And Marcus, he was a man who chose silence because silence was safe. But safety was a lie, a cage that kept him from living. Lena lived her life with a confidence that Marcus could only admire. She wrote, published, and surrounded herself with people who valued her truth. She wasn't waiting for Marcus, wasn't pining for his call, and that, paradoxically, made him want her more. At a literary festival, they met. Again, Lena was a panelist, her words sharp and alive. Marcus watched from the crowd, his heart a battlefield. When their eyes met afterward, she approached, her smile warm but distant. "You keep showing up," she said, her tone playful but her eyes searching. "I can't seem to stay away," he replied, his voice raw. They talked, the conversation a fragile bridge. Lena spoke of her latest project, a novel about love and courage. Marcus spoke of Nexus, his voice hollow. He wanted to tell her everything, his fear, his silence, his longing. But the words stayed. Locked inside, Lena didn't chase. She listened, nodded, and walked away. Her absence was a mirror, reflecting Marcus's weakness. She wasn't playing a game, she was living her truth. And that truth was a challenge. If he wanted her, he had to earn her, not by proving his worth to her, but by proving it to himself. Peterson's words echoed, "You don't get what you want by demanding it. You get it by becoming the person who deserves it." Marcus realized his silence wasn't just fear. It was inadequacy. He didn't believe he was strong enough to love Lena, to be the man she deserved, and that realization was a fire, burning away his excuses. Marcus sought help. He started therapy, not to fix himself, but to understand. He listened to Peterson's lectures, diving into the archetypes of the hero, the shadow, and the anima. He confronted his past, the father who taught him to suppress, the mother who left, Sarah who walked away. He saw that his fear wasn't just about Lena. It was about the boy he'd been, the man he'd become, and the man he wanted to be. One evening, he called Lena. His heart pounded, but he pushed through. She answered, her voice calm but curious. "I've been silent," he said, the words raw. "Not because I don't care, but because I care too much. I'm trying to figure out how to be the man you deserve." Lena listened, her silence not a judgment but an invitation. "I don't need you to be anything," she said. "I just need you to be honest." That conversation was a turning point. Marcus didn't rush to win her over. He focused on himself. He worked on Nexus with renewed purpose, not to escape, but to create. He faced his fears, not to banish them, but to integrate them. And slowly, he began to see Lena not as a threat, but as a partner in the adventure of life. The literary festival lingered in his mind. Lena's strength, her refusal to crumble, was a beacon. She didn't need him, and that was her power. But she wanted him. She'd given him her card, her time, her attention. The question was whether Marcus could meet her halfway, not as a king, but as a man. Marcus's journey was a battle, not against Lena, but against himself. Therapy peeled back the layers of his past, revealing the boy who'd learned to hide, his heart. Peterson's lectures became a guide, their wisdom a light in the darkness. "The hero doesn't avoid the dragon," Peterson said. "He faces it, and in facing it, he becomes more than he was." Marcus wanted to be more, not for Lena, but for himself. He began to change. At Nexus, he fought Ethan's attacks with clarity, not rage. The company stabilized, its stock climbing. But the real work was internal. Marcus wrote in a journal, words he'd never dared speak. He admitted his fear of failure, his longing for connection, his shame at his silence. The act was a rebellion, against his father's lessons, a step toward vulnerability. One evening, Marcus invited Lena to dinner. He chose a quiet restaurant, its warmth a contrast to his sterile office. She arrived, her presence a calm fire. They talked, not as strangers, but as two souls seeking truth. Marcus was honest, his words raw, but real. "I've been afraid," he said. "Not of you, but of what you make me feel. I'm learning to face that fear." Lena listened, her eyes steady. "Fear's human," she said. "What matters is what you do with it." They didn't fall into each other's arms. Love wasn't a movie. But they began to build something. Trust, respect, a shared willingness to be seen. Marcus didn't ask for her love. He offered his truth. And Lena, in her strength, met him halfway. Marcus's life began to balance. Nexus thrived, not as an escape, but as a creation. He reconnected with old friends, mended ties with his sister, faced the pain of his mother's absence. Each step was a choice, a rejection of silence. He saw Lena regularly, their conversations deep and honest. She challenged him, not with demands, but with her presence, and he rose to meet her, not as a king, but as a man. Peterson's archetype of the anima came to mind, Lena as the feminine ideal, not a goddess to worship, but a partner to respect. She wasn't his salvation. She was his mirror, reflecting his potential. And Marcus, for the first time, believed he could be enough. Not perfect, but enough. The choice to love wasn't a single moment. It was a series of choices. To be honest, to be vulnerable, to be present. Marcus made those choices, not because Lena demanded them, but because he wanted to be the man who could stand beside her. And in doing so, he found something greater than control. Freedom. Months later, Marcus and Lena stood together at the launch of Nexus's new platform, a tool that empowered creators like Lena to share their work with the world. The event was a triumph, the crowd buzzing with excitement. But for Marcus, the true victory was standing beside Lena, her hand in his, their connection a quiet strength. They weren't perfect. There were moments of doubt, of tension, of silence. But they navigated them with honesty, respect, and a shared commitment to growth. Lena's independence was her power, and Marcus's vulnerability was his. Together, they were a covenant, a promise to face the dragon of chaos as partners. The platform's launch was symbolic, a balance of Marcus's ambition and Lena's creativity. He'd designed it with her in mind, not to win her, but to honor her. She'd contributed ideas, her writer's mind shaping its soul. The result was something neither could have built alone, a testament to their partnership. As the crowd celebrated, Marcus took Lena's hand. "I was afraid of you," he admitted, his voice low, "not because of who you are, but because of what you made me feel." Lena smiled, her eyes bright. "And I was drawn to you, not because you were perfect, but because you were willing to try." Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was a journey, a series of choices to love, to grow, to be seen. Peterson's words came to mind. "Love is a decision, not a feeling." Marcus and Lena had decided, not out of need, but out of respect, admiration, and a shared vision of what life could be. They walked through the city that night, the lights a constellation of possibility. Marcus thought of his past, the boy who hid his heart, the man who built an empire, the king who feared his wound. He was still that boy, that man, that king. But he was also more. A partner, a lover, a soul who'd faced the dragon and chosen to dance with it. Lena, beside him, was a force of her own. She didn't need Marcus to complete her. She chose him because he added to her light. And that was the covenant, not dependence but choice, not control but freedom, not silence but truth. The city hummed around them, a reminder of the world they'd help shape. Nexus would grow, Lena's novels would inspire, and their love would evolve. But the core remained. Two souls, wounded but whole, choosing each other in the face of chaos. The weight of silence is more than a story. It's a mirror, reflecting the fears we all carry, the silences we impose, the loves we hesitate to claim. Marcus and Lena face their dragons not by denying them, but by stepping into their fire. And you, yes, you, have dragons of your own. What are you afraid to feel? What are you afraid to choose? The path to love, to growth, to meaning, is not found in comfort. It's found in courage, in the willingness to be seen, to be vulnerable, to be true. Don't let your fears silence you. Take the leap. Call that person. Face that truth. Become the person you're meant to be. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your soul, then share it. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The world needs more courage, more honesty, more love, and it starts with you. Act now. Choose truth. Let your voice be heard.